to episode 2. Today we're going to be focusing on identity crisis. So my name is Henry. I'm 18 years old.
I'm Chloe. I'm also 18 years old.
I'm Sean. I'm 18 years old.
I'm David. I'm 16.
I'm Max. I'm 14.
I'm Ryan. I'm 14.
And I'm Albert. I'm 16.
So I guess to get started, does anybody want to explain in their words what they think an identity crisis is, or for like personal experience, like what they define an identity crisis as?
First, personally, from what I know, I think an identity crisis is a disconnect between you as a being and your identity. Thus, the name identity crisis. However, specifically for Asian Americans, I think it's the disconnect between not belonging to a group, where you don't feel like you belong to your Asian side because you don't speak the language or you didn't grow up there, and your American side where you look different than everyone else.
I guess there's this like interconnectedness of the idea that like sometimes when you do have the culture where you're divided between two pieces, it's easy to feel like you don't fit into either box or check either box. So for examples of like the Asian American side, it's like you might not feel American enough or Asian enough. So it's just this split identity and split being within yourself.
I mean, I guess for me, like, an identity crisis is just, like, not really accepting who you are. Like, if you're Asian and that's, like, a part of you, and then you can't really accept that or, like, come to terms with that, like, makes up the identity crisis. And, like, that's really the bulk of it. Seeing as how, like, I don't really think we're going to be, like, examining past that definition. Like, yeah, that's just pretty much all I got.
I mean, I guess it's interesting to think about, like, psychologically, the idea of, like, why people do have these identity crises, because for something that's not really talked about in, like, mass media or even in our school systems, there's something that happens, like, so regularly. And I think it kind of starts from the whole idea of, like, the bystander effect, from, like, a psychological perspective. It's just, like, the idea that as a child, and kind of just in life itself, people constantly want to be like everybody else. If they're in a space where there's lots of people that are different from them, there's this constant desire to kind of fit in and feel like everybody else around you, to become a part of this group. And we're not really taught as children that it's okay to be different. It's more so this societal need and social norms that make people feel like they have to be like everybody around them to fit in. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced that in their lives.
So I guess like personal experience-wise, I moved to the U.S. when I was 5, and in the first school I went to in Portland, Oregon, I was literally the only Asian person in my whole entire school, and it was like an elementary school of like 500, 600 people, so it was not fun to see the other people around you not share similar experiences, and I literally moved when I was 5, so I didn't know how to speak a word of English, so it was tough, like, talking to other people at first, and I guess the only way of fitting, of trying to assimilate into culture was trying to fit in with everyone else by leaving a bit of my Asian side away.
Yeah, so, like, me personally, I can see, like, definitely how it starts as, like, with children. So, Chloe mentioned, like, as kids, we're not really, like, taught that, like, much about our differences. And I would say, like, I would take that one step even further and say, like, as kids, like, the social climate encourages you to make fun of people's differences and, like, criticize them, because if you make fun of the differences, you're just, like, part of the crowd, and that's really what, like, everyone can do. And also, like, differences are the easiest things to spot. Like, so I guess we can launch into, like, personal experiences right now. Me personally, I will say, like, when I was younger, I got, like, a lot of, like, really racist remarks for being Asian. How do I say this? Yeah, an unnamed individual. I will not, in fact, be giving this man's name, man or woman. Let me clarify. He would see me in the hallway. He just starts screaming like, "Oh, sorry, my bad." They them would see me in the hallway and start screaming like noodle, because I'm like Asian and like noodles are associated with Asians, and it's like stuff like that makes you like really hard to accept your culture, because you're like, well, why is like everyone laughing at me if he's just saying like the word noodle and like looking at me? And so like you start to reject like the parts that are associated with whatever it is that they're making fun of. And for me, in this case, it was like specifically to be like being Asian, and like I kind of rejected that part. I mean, I've come to like accept it now, but like back then it was super difficult because I couldn't understand why people were making fun of it. And as a result, like I just only decided to go along with what they were doing and just like drop it completely. My Asian side, that is. So yeah. But if anyone else wants to share their personal stuff, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I was exposed to two like pretty different cultures, some of the norms in my Asian culture, like they differed from culture in the U.S. And for example, like food, right? Sometimes I would bring in food into the lunchroom, and people would be like, "What is that? That looks disgusting." And I wouldn't really understand because this is the food that I got used to eating, and I thought it was normal. I thought it was tasty, but you know, I got made fun of it, so I kind of started to reject it a little bit. And you know, I was like, okay, do I really like this, or you know, does this make me weird?
I just want to mention too, like, this isn't just like a side of like Americans being racist towards Asians. Like Henry and I can attest to like going to China and then like being like sort of like discriminated against. I'm not gonna say like hate crime, but like there was a lot of discrimination in China against us because we came from America, and like it's hard to feel accepted as a Chinese person if like your Chinese side is also criticizing you. And I would say like in China too, they have like a lot less filter, respectfully. Like they're way more okay with just like telling you straight up, like, oh yeah, we're discriminating you because you're American. Like there's this one example that sticks with my mind. Do you remember this? We went to a temple, I think, and we saw like some performance and it was like raining. So I was trying to buy an umbrella from this like old woman, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I know you're American," and you're. She said it in a way that she's like, "I know you're really American and not Chinese, so I was going to charge you more for that umbrella, but I'm not going to charge you as much for it, but I'm still going to charge you like more." It was like really weird. Lord knows why she like explained to me the play-by-play of her thought process as she scammed me out of my hard-earned money. But like, God bless her, because like that. Now I get to have something to talk about on the podcast. Do you remember that?
No.
Okay,
But I do understand how like going to China, you still won't feel like home because not only did you not like grow up there, you didn't experience a lot of the cultural differences. Even though we're technically still Chinese, we still didn't grow up in China. So, and it's actually extremely recognizable in China. They instantly can recognize that. Oh, you're American. It just happens that we could speak Chinese, and that was probably why you got some discount.
Yeah, I got the Chinese speaking discount, not quite the Chinese person discount.
Yeah. Do you guys want to go next?
I guess kind of to circle back about what you were talking about like food and lunchtime at school. I've been like working in a lot of schools like this summer and the past couple of years, and I think that now, and kind of, I guess to circle back also to what we were talking about at the beginning, and that what Sean made a really good point about is the idea that like in school systems, like not only are children not taught to be accepting, like they're more so like taught by their friends and taught by society to like point out each other's differences. I've seen kind of now the idea of like culturally relevant pedagogy being like introduced into a classroom setting, which is the idea that like children should be taught and it should be like shared with in like story time in a classroom or like through the different work that's being done in a classroom, that like people have these like cultural differences. And I think that a lot of times they're trying to implement those like, I guess, relevant moments at like a lunchtime setting because they see that like through food and through having like different foods from different places in the world, that is a point that has been like of bullying and of like contrast, I guess, in a school setting. So I think it's interesting that like that's something that you were pointing out as like one of your personal moments that you remember, and something that maybe schools are like trying to start to amend, but that's something that obviously needs to be increased immensely for everybody to feel included and accepted.
I mean, I don't want to like talk too much about like educational reform because that's not really the purpose of this, but we're talking about like developmentally how identity crises can start. Like kids can be really easily racist because it's hard as a child to understand why like you being extremely racist to like an Asian and just screaming like nu do to them, or like just like anything really, can be like harmful in the long run. But, and I don't want to say like race, like the in-depth effects of racism should be covered in a curriculum because like that's way too complicated for children. But it's just the idea that like as kids they don't understand like what's wrong with their behaviors, and like I still know how do I say this? I still know the bloke, the chap that did this, like that was in my story, and like they are like a well-adjusted human now. Like I don't mind them at all. In fact, I'm like friends with them, so it's not like it's that much of an issue at all. as a child, you don't see it as that much of an issue at all, but like you definitely grow older and you start to realize how messed up it is as you like mature. And I think that's kind of worth noting because you're not going to be like stuck in that mindset forever.
I mean, statistically, I think that like people have seen that there's a lot of like connection between the amount of like therapy or need for therapy that people have had with the idea of having like identity crisis or like feeling racism as a young child. And like there's a large, I guess, kind of like interconnectedness between those two ideas that people feel the need to like get help when they grow up as a child feeling as if they're different or like made as the other.
I guess like going back to the curriculum stuff, like do you think there is any way that this can be taught earlier on in the school?
Like, no. I'm pretty cynical. If you watched yesterday's episode, you heard me say that too. Like, I don't feel like children can be taught at a young age, like, given how complex, like, racial inequality is as a concept, and then explain to them, like, how invisible, like, microaggressions can lead to, like, extreme hate and extreme, like, as Chloe mentioned, otherism developing in their lives. Like, that's not something children can comprehend, especially at the age where, like, you're more likely to make jokes based on people's differences. As you get older, you start to realize, especially because, like, my exposure to social media and, like, a lot of content creator centric, like, platforms, like, I don't know, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, like, all of them pretty much say the same thing, like, and they push it in your face a lot, like, your differences should be celebrated. And I guess, like, the overexposure of that as you grow older makes you, like, really take it in. I'm not saying, like, that's a bad thing, that's a good thing. It's more something you have to learn with time and a lot of people telling you it rather than, like, conceptually from a school system, I feel. The concept of, like, how messed up racism is, I guess.
Yeah, I think a big part about teaching this to younger kids is like normalizing it so they don't see it as something different and they don't like make fun of it. They just see, oh, it's this kind of culture that I've seen 100 times before. There's nothing, I mean, I wouldn't say it's nothing special about it, but there's nothing like surprising about it. And I feel like that like normalizing the different cultures and like the foods they eat, the kinds of like festivals they have, is definitely one big step in towards like the like minimizing racism, like racism in the younger kids.
I guess kind of to go back to a point that Sean made about social media, how do you guys feel social media has had a conjunction with the idea of like celebration of your identity versus like, I guess, kind of feeling worse about who you are? Like, do you think it's been helpful or more of a hindrance or both?
You can like someone said before, you can definitely see the experiences of like other people around the world, or like around the U.S. at least, that are in a similar perspective. Like obviously there's the people in your school that are also Asian American that have like a more closely shared experience, but there are people from like California, from like Utah, just random states around the country that also go through these things, and just like knowing that like it's not knowing that it's a problem that not only you go through, that everyone else goes through. It's a pretty connecting experience, and it makes you feel better.
I mean, yeah, like in a sense, this is gonna sound kind of weird, but like when you go to these social media platforms and you like see other people's experiences, you start to realize like just how ununique you are. Like you look back on your experiences that you thought were like difficult or like kind of hard, and you start to see like how many other people have gone through the exact same thing you've gone through. And although it feels like you're not unique in that sense, it feels like way more rewarding because you realize that you're part of a community of people that have gone through the same things you have gone through. And that's why I really think like social media helps a lot with accepting who you are, because you start to learn from like other people who have accepted who they are and who have gone through the same things as you, like how to go about that process. I mean, does anyone like have anything specific that they want to talk about with it? Like their experiences with social media and like being Asian, I guess.
I think I've definitely had like a short film or like a TikTok that is like deemed to be a certain or like deemed to be Chinese, and like a lot of people are saying like, oh my god, it's so good. And I've definitely felt pride in like reading those comments underneath those videos, and I feel like having for kids to see their culture succeeding is definitely a really good thing for them to see.
I mean, yeah, like your whole life, in the case of like, someone who is like being discriminated against, like you go your whole life thinking like your culture is a bad thing, and then all of a sudden people are like celebrating it. So that's really chill. It's not a good word.
No. And that makes sense. Like the idea that like you need to celebrate the people around you, and I guess kind of like connecting back to the idea of like what can be done in a school setting and with social media. Like I know a lot of schools and just like a lot of social media websites are both doing this, with the idea of like spending time with like lots of different people and really like putting an emphasis on celebrating different people for their differences and using that as like a mechanism to like push back on the amount of bullying that occurs in a school setting, but also just like in the world as a whole. It's the idea that like sometimes a celebration and I guess kind of like having pride about who you are and where you come from can be the opposite of, I guess, these like horrible moments that people go through as a child.
Like on TikTok, I've definitely seen before, like a video literally capturing like the Asian American like childhood experience in the U.S. and it's like it's like a slideshow of like the things we experience, like not the bad things, but like more of the snacks or like the going to Chinese school on Sundays.
They have your life like play by play.
Yeah, and like different snacks we eat, like the rice crackers, or like those like it's like yogurt things we used to eat, like just like stuff like that. So like other people from like around the country are like also going through these, like, yeah.
How does that make you feel?
Definitely like Sean has said before, it to an extent it like makes what I thought were distinct experiences feel more normalized, and it makes me feel like more part of the society as a whole, of the Asian American experience.
Well, man, I was getting water.
Do you want to repeat what you said, just like the end of it?
It definitely makes me feel ingrained in the Asian American experience, because it's a shared experience that a lot of people our age in the U.S. go through.
I think like a big definitely a cause to why as Asian Americans we need like something to look up to is because of the generational gap between our parents and us. Because a majority of Asian Americans, or like a good portion of Asian Americans, are either first generation immigrants or came before or second gen, I guess. And their parents lived or grew up in their origin country, and they never really experienced the growing up in a different country where no one looked like you or no one did the same things as you. Like culturally, it was different. And I think that's why social media is a great outlet for Asian Americans, or any immigrant for that matter, to really connect with their culture and share their experiences with other people like them.
I think like a really important point of what Henry said is that like Asian children don't have a good role model for when they like develop like cognizance, I guess I want to say. Like we hopefully I'm not going to be here. They are going to talk about more about this when they talk about like Asian parent relationships with their children. But I think it's like really fascinating just how disconnected Asian parents are from their children. Like, not only do they grow up in like China, which is a whole unique environment on their own, America is like so drastically different from like anything normal you'd expect. Like everything is significant. I feel like Chinese parents have like a very simplistic outlook on like what an adolescent's life is, but it's like super nuanced, and a lot of the times like they don't really understand how like minor microaggressions can like really build up over time. And so like by not having these role models and instead like replacing them with social media, I think like in that sense social media is like really beneficial for a child's development. Like I'm not going to talk about like pipelines or like terrible videos or stuff like that when it comes to social media.
iPad kids.
Let's not talk about those. Just pretend like they don't exist.
I mean, I guess to like speak to the disconnect that you're talking about, I teach this class, and one of the students in the class, like all the students I work with have special needs, and one of the students happens to be like an Asian American, and the parents have like very strong ideals for like what they think this child needs to accomplish in life. Like they're saying to the teachers in this class, like, oh, he should be, above the reading level, he should like he's going to be a doctor when he grows up. Like this is what we want for him, and this child has special needs. And
are they saying this like with the child's special needs in mind?
no, the parents, I guess, kind of to connect to the point that you were making, feel are extremely disconnected from their child because they can't recognize the fact that even though they have these aspirations for their child and they feel like this is, the path that their child has to take, they won't recognize that the child is probably not going to get to those points because of the, medical differences and like the disabilities that their child faces just on a neurological level. And I guess it's similar to what you were saying. Like there is a large disconnect between what parents view as what their children can do versus what actually happens.
Yeah. I mean, does anyone want to comment on that? Because no, I'll just go. We sort of talked about this on the model minority episode, which we recorded yesterday, where parents will push this very set path onto their children of work hard, study harder, become a doctor, be successful, and that plays a lot into causing an identity crisis because let's say that's not what you want. Now you not only don't fit in with all of the people at school, anyone from your home country, you also don't even fit in with your family. So the thing about we should move away from Asian parenting, but I'll just leave it with this, where generally Asian parents, not to roast you, sorry. We have an Asian parent in the room. Generally Asian parents don't really understand how they can how their impact on their children makes things way worse because they can't broaden their understanding of the world. Yes, they are familiar with a lot of aspects that you need to become an adult, but they also don't understand how life is in America and how much more I guess just using the word I used before, nuanced it is compared to China. I'd say China, and also during their time, it was a lot more straightforward, just study hard, work harder, become a doctor, etc., etc. So yeah, but we should move away from Asian parenting. That's not what we're talking about.
I guess kind of to ask a question to the group, in moments where you have felt these, I guess kind of disconnects from your culture and from who you are and from your identity, what have been some telltale signs for yourself that you kind of felt within oh, I am going through these things, this is how I'm feeling?
I guess I can go. I for the longest time. I mean, did you want to? Okay.
No, go.
I for the longest time really hated being Chinese, because one, it was always something that people would make fun of, and for the longest time in my mind, it also stuck as how is it? How do you say? It always stuck in my mind as something to be ashamed of because being Chinese is being. The perception in my mind was that it was cheap, it was goofy, and it wasn't really something to be respected, and that came from basically a lot of stereotypes about one, that whole made in China joke, everything is made in China because China's kind of the factory lands, respectfully, and also just a lot of jokes about my race when I was younger, and really harsh jokes as well, for instance the unnamed chap, but yeah, I think you can start telling it when you look on aspects of your not even aspect, but your culture in general, and you're just I don't want to be a part of this. And of course, I got over it. I'm recording this podcast about it right now, and also I ended up just putting it out there. If you're a kid and you're listening to this, you could definitely turn that into a sick college essay.
So I think I'll go next. So personally, I've never had an issue with identity. I was never very ashamed of being Chinese, even though there weren't a lot of people around me that looked like me. I did, however, find a group of friends that did come from similar origins. They were all, or a majority, were from Asia, different parts of Asia. I think I was the only Chinese one, but I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a main source of this self-identity crisis comes from a lack of confidence.
No, I disagree. no, I'm kidding. I do agree.
A lack of confidence in your number one, of course, your own self, but also a lack of confidence in what you who you feel you belong to.
I mean, it makes sense that it develops. You're told your whole childhood, your culture is funny, shouldn't be taken seriously. It's just like the butt of all jokes, and like you don't really hear much beyond that because it's not like your parents are there like every day telling you like you're Chinese, that's amazing, be proud of that. Like they're not there to counteract the constant like input of just like your culture is bad and it should be made fun of. I'm not saying like that's their obligation. It isn't. That's like a lot of work to overcome racism as like one person. So like it's definitely really easy to see like how your confidence can like shredded when you're younger. Yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
You guys want to ask a question?
I mean, I guess it kind of speaks to the idea like why representation is so important because, as you said, like, you know, as a child, like it's not your parents can't fully be the one being like, oh, you know, this is amazing, like, you know, this part of you is so special, and that's not something that every parent is going to make the effort to do. But I guess for like media and TV shows and books you read, like it's so important to see yourself represented, and also just like to see yourself, no matter who you are, no matter what makes you different, what makes you similar, to see that put on a pedestal as being like amazing and special and making your like other people around you feel good because of like what makes them different is so important as a child.
Yeah.
And I mean, whether it's done in school or it's done outside of school, like having that representation is so utterly important for like our community building.
I feel like another good way of like getting over like your own negative perceptions of your culture is to just like, well, specifically for like Chinese people, I would say in my personal experience, like going to China really helped with it. So I was super lucky and I was able to like participate in basically like, was it all expenses paid? I don't know. Yeah, basically like an all expenses paid trip to China for like 3 summers in a row. And like I loved it. Not so much because like I learned a lot about the culture or whatever crap I wrote in that college essay, but mostly because I got to hang out a lot with my friends, and like that made China seem like super cool and super fun to me. And like I got over my negative perceptions of China because like I realized that it was kind of just like any other place. It wasn't like there wasn't like clowns all over the street or whatever. It wasn't like every noodle shop was just a running joke. Like I was able to go there and I was able to like have a good time, and it felt like normal. It didn't feel like I would like all of a sudden like that unnamed bloke would come out of nowhere and like start making fun of me. Like I don't know how to describe it, but if you just go to the place that like you do feel kind of ashamed of, and then you just like you find yourself like having a good time there, like that's probably one of the best ways to overcome like the lack of confidence in the culture that I guess you're a part of.
I mean, I guess, did anybody here also have a similar experience to Sean, where it's like the idea of like finding community has been something that has helped with your, I guess, feeling like disconnected from your culture, who you are? Because I feel like community always does play a large role in who you are and how you can represent yourself and the people around you.
We're cutting this out in post.
Yeah, we're good.
I should leave that in. I mean, so insofar as like community, I think, okay, every listener's gonna like hate me for saying this, but like I low-key feel like Chinese school is not bad.
Yeah.
No way that was the W thing.
Okay, the thing is, so what I've heard from a lot of people, as they went to Chinese school, is that while you're going to Chinese school, no one enjoys it. Like absolutely worst place.
Oh my god.
But from what I've learned is that a majority of people who persevered and eventually got through 9th grade or took the AP, they all thank their parents that like, wow, I'm really happy that I learned this language. And I've also heard a lot of people who quit like regret it because they don't feel as close to their culture as they wish they were.
You make it sound like we went to battle. We just like sat in a room for 3 hours and listened to a bloke reading like a textbook.
I mean, when you're in like 6th grade, it's basically battle.
It's a battle to stay awake. Regular school, I guess. In regular school, it's a lot more difficult to like foster your interests than in Chinese school. Like I say, in Chinese school, I had a lot easier of a time. Like I was able to get into like a little bit of teaching, which I really enjoyed, and then like badminton, which I love. There was that like. I just started like picking up a lot of hobbies in Chinese school. Granted, a lot of them went underdeveloped because I am very lazy, but I thought that like overall, it's just Chinese school is like not a bad environment as like a community. And also, parents, you can definitely show this to your kids and tell them that Chinese school is what is this? AAPI certified.
Yeah, definitely. Chinese school, even though I hated it at the time, and I still never wish to go back, I'm glad that I did it.
Yeah, like you'd have to clarify to them like you are going to hate Chinese school and hate us for like putting you through it. But like after you've gone through it, it's really not that bad, especially if you do take the AP and you do well in it. Moving along.
I had such a
We're
similar
cutting this out.
experience, like going to Hebrew school on Sundays. Like my mom speaks to us in Hebrew at home, and that's kind of like the main way we communicate. And I've never had anybody like around me who had a similar experience. And I again like didn't love getting up on Sunday mornings at 7:30. Didn't love driving far away to go sit in a room and learn things that I probably already knew at home. And the teacher wasn't always very nice. But like by the end of it, like this year we had a whole graduation, and there's just like. It's such a nice community that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't gone through it. So I think like the opportunity to like do those school programs where even if you don't feel happy in the moment, it's so worth it at the end of the day. And I don't know, now I won't say that I regret doing it, but I'm sure like child me would not be happy with that statement because, you know, it's early and lots of work, but it's nice to feel that you have people around you that have similar experiences.
Small footnote, the community sense only comes because you all have been through the same boring classes, not for any other reason. So if you put yourself through those boring classes with those same people, that's where the community comes from. Nowhere else.
I don't know if it's because I'm younger or I dropped out of Chinese school, but for me, like I think going to it made me hate my culture even more because I was basically being forced by not forced, but like heavily pressured by my family.
I'm just gonna say you were forced.
Yeah, I was basically forced to go and spend time on Sundays where I wanted to do other activities that I enjoyed.
Like sleeping.
Yeah, and I went to Chinese school instead. And the particular topics that we learned there, they didn't really interest me at all, and they kind of just made me think that. I mean, I guess it's for different people, right? But it wasn't for me. And I kept saying I didn't want to do it, but you know, I was sent back.
Yeah, slightly more like. Oh, I don't know if you guys want to talk about Chinese school.
Wait, so
yeah.
What year did you quit?
I quit in 6th grade, I think.
6th grade.
Yeah.
Sorry, just like a slightly more like nuanced explanation of like how the Chinese school curve works. Like, you have to put them through the whole thing. Otherwise, if you drop them halfway through, like they will forever just dislike being Chinese because like you will leave them with probably the most negative memories of like being Chinese of their lives because like my brother like just attests to this. Like you're waking them up like early in the morning, lugging them out to some like rented college, like far away from your home, forcing them to sit in a room where you learn about like what was that one lesson?
Sun Wukong.
Yeah, Sun Wukong. No, Sun Wukong's fire. You can't say that.
Sun Wukong's
That was good.
Fire. You learn about like the cherry blossoms fall on the river and the man falls into the river or whatever. Like that's not like applicable, and like that generates like a lot of hate for your culture. But I think if you put them through it, like Henry and I can say, and also I think if we were to like ask the other people in Chinese school who also went to the same like China trips, have the same like experiences as us, like they would say the same thing. Like they really like Chinese school. They like the aftermath of Chinese school.
They appreciated themselves persevering and not quitting.
Yeah, like overall the end experience, it was worth it. They say, but for Max, I can totally understand how you did it.
I mean, I think the way that I liked my culture more is when I looked at something that was related to my culture, and it was something I liked. I mean, for example, like social media, there were kind of like, I'm not going to mention the specific YouTuber, but they were like parody skits of of like common stereotypes, and it was kind of making fun of those stereotypes and showing how absurd they were. And it was a comedy, right? It was funny, so I liked it, and it was related to my culture, so it made me better appreciate my culture and understand it compared to a Chinese school where we learned about boring stories.
Okay, not to be like telling you how you felt, because that's like kind of terrible. Like I just want to say, like, I feel like for the vast majority of people, if you show someone a funny video about Chinese stereotypes, they're not gonna appreciate Chinese culture more, because those stereotypes just like end up ingrained in your head. After all, like that's not like my hatred of my culture developed, right? Like the stereotype, like, oh, every Chinese person eats noodles, so funny. Like that's what kicked off like my like sort of identity crisis when it came to like being Chinese. So maybe for Max and maybe for like a lot of you silly goofy fellas, maybe watching like funny videos with stereotypes works, but I would like sort of urge against that. I also think those videos are like kind of inherently harmful if they're not made by an Asian person. Did you watch them?
They're by an Asian person.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, I think.
But like, if you're like not Asian, you make those videos, like, yikes. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I mean, I think my experience growing up kind of differed because I didn't really, like people were calling like noodle to me.
Respect.
It was kind of like the opposite because of my friend group and the people I was surrounded with were all in very similar situations as me. And so seeing that for the first time, I guess, it was just funny to me.
Yeah, my 6th grade was kind of a free-for-all in retrospect.
I mean, I guess what you guys are saying is, like, there's different ways that you can feel connected and, like, deal with those identity crises. Like, everybody has different experiences, and then therefore everybody has different ways that they find to, like, mend said experiences.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's unique, and, like, we shouldn't say that, like, one treatment works best, but, like, let's just say Henry and I heavily urge Chinese school. AAPI certified.
I mean, even just going through it and just learning the language, even though a majority of it, I'm sure both of us have forgotten. I think we can speak, but reading and writing are out the window.
No, I can definitely read a bit of Chinese.
But
perhaps
to have the ability to talk to your parents or your grandparents or any relative that solely speaks Chinese is definitely something that I appreciate going to Chinese school for.
Yeah, actually, that is a really nice addition. Not that I speak Chinese very well, but just being able to do so at all is like pretty chill. Can you stop laughing when I say chill?
I guess kind of like going off a point that you said is like a lot of your friends had similar circumstances and similar, I guess, issues or similar, I guess, just personalities and what they were going through when you were growing up. Do you think that was something that was helpful, that you kind of were all going through the same things at the same time?
Yeah, definitely, because, it just gave me people to relate to, and it felt like I wasn't alone. I wasn't in this special circumstance that was incredibly challenging. It felt normal. I honestly didn't really feel much identity crisis at all throughout my life, I think.
I mean, Ryan, you were like a part of Max's friend group. Do you want to like talk about how I guess you both might have like shielded each other from like the effects of identity crisis?
So, me and Max, same friend group. We also have a lot of other Asian friends, so it's even stronger. We all kind of shared our experiences about. I didn't actually feel that same with Max. I didn't feel that much identity crisis growing up. So, but even if I did, all my other friends, we would talk about it, and we would just. We're not alone. We're not alone.
You'd probably just like laugh it off, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, oh, sorry. I just want to say like, yeah.
I was just going to ask if Albert wanted to share about his experiences. Like, did you have a similar situation where you felt with your friends that you had similar, were in a similar circumstance, or did you kind of feel like you had to deal with it on your own?
I think it was the former mainly. A lot of my friends are Asian. My class has 50% Asian, so yeah. So basically, a lot of people got along because we all felt really interconnected, and everybody was pretty similar. Asians or Southeast Asians or just Indians. I think they're basically the same, but yeah. Yeah.
But no, we are not lumping all of them in one group.
No.
Right along.
I think he's saying the idea of
Stop
they
laughing.
had similar experiences.
You're a strange
No.
bloke. I'm saying that to Henry, not Albert.
I was thinking about it. Yeah, okay. I was geographically. No, never mind.
But I mean, yeah, I get your point. It's the fact that all of you aren't you're all other, quote unquote other, when compared to the people in your grade, because you're not a part of their race, I guess. If that's how you see it, right?
Yeah.
Unenthusiastic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, personal experience wise, so my friends and I, Asian friends and I, we all have this Discord chat, where it's just math studying. So before a test, we all hop on this Discord chat and just study for a math test, and that consists of basically 90% of the class, was 90% of the class are Asian, but they were just help each other out, and it definitely builds a sense of community among the people.
I guess I'm in the minority for saying when I was growing up, I didn't like have a lot of other Asians around me. Like I had really like one other friend who was Chinese. I'm trying to like remember, like maybe 2 or 3 more, but I wasn't really like close with them. I don't know, like Henry, if you had the same experience, did you?
I didn't have a lot of close Chinese friends, but definitely a bunch of Asians. So
Like I guess like how do you like East Asian?
yeah, like Korean.
Yeah, like for me, I only
Mainly
had,
Korean, but
Yeah.
Japanese as well.
I mean, for me, I only had like 2 or 3 like East Asian friends that I was like kind of close with. So, when I like was I guess during my like adolescence, I didn't really like have a lot of how do you say like a community to rely on with like my friends group because I was just kind of like on my own with a lot of this stuff, and so like I can see how like people if they have a stable friend group of like a lot of other East Asians, like how that can play out in their favor definitely. But like if you're the main danger of the identity crisis developing is like what happens if you're an isolated Asian because like you start to buy into what everyone else is telling you that like your culture is goofy, your culture is whack, haha doodles.
I guess this is more of like a hypothetical, but I mean, if you guys want to be parents, or when you are parents, if that's something you like are planning to do you think it's going to be important that you introduce your children to like other individuals that are like of the same culture as them, so that they can have these relationships, or do you think that it should be more on like the child's side to find these people that are similar to them and build these communities?
I think it's really important that you introduce them to like other people of their same race. Like, don't be like me. Do not turn out like me. This was a mistake. It's really important that you like show your kids that like they're not alone in what they're dealing with. Because if your kid feels like they're alone with what they're dealing with, they're just gonna like drop the whole problem entirely by just like going with whatever the crowd says. Because like they don't want to be the one who's like constantly outcasted and like haha doodles. You make doodles. You eat doodles. You are doodles. Like they don't want to be that person. So. They're probably just going to end up dropping that culture entirely because they feel like that's where all the ridicule comes from. So, by showing them that like their culture is like not something to be ashamed of, and like there are other people that sort of like not go through what they're going through, but have like the same heritage as them. Like that's really really important for child development.
And like for those certain people who are not lucky enough to like live in a school district or in a community that has like other Asian people around them, like definitely as we talked before, like social media or like literally being online, like seeing shared experiences, that can definitely work. I guess like to bring up a question to the group, like do you think mainstream media, because we were talking like mainstream media before and like about the videos being made, do you think with like the TV shows like Crazy Rich Asians or like Fresh Off the Boat, do you think those benefit Asian Americans, or do you think they harm and like push the stereotype even more?
Okay, I guess I'll go then. Unless you guys want to talk. Alright, we're cutting this in post again. So I think I have like a very strong opinion on how like media handles Asians in like art depictions. So in content that's specifically like Asian centric, where the main focus is Asians and the cast is Asian, whatever, I think a really good job is done to like pay cultural homage to like the roots of the film, or sorry, a fly flew into me. The roots of like wherever they came from, or however like the story developed. And I think like movies, shows, like content basically that focuses on stuff like that does a good job of representing the culture. However, when it comes to other like content that does not have Asians as the central focus, there's like I'm pretty sure there's like a 99% rate of like them just being incredibly racist and like Orientalist. Like, for instance, like, okay, this is like a really ridiculous example, but in Minions, what's the new Minions movie? The new
Rise of
Gru.
Gru.
Fire movie, by the way. 10 out of 10, I recommend it. But like, there is for some reason like a plot point where the Minions go learn kung fu from an old Asian lady, and then like a zodiac amulet is stolen or whatever, and like that's all the Chinese representation that's like in that movie. And like I was sitting there, like I felt like I was being hate crime. It was like fine because the movie was fire. Sorry, that was a joke. It's not fine to be hate crime. it's just I just think like the representation that Asians get when Asians are not the central focus of the film is super shallow and really, really terrible. Like it's not properly developed. It almost always draws from like the quote unquote like highlights of a culture, like the exotic aspects that everyone like loves because it makes the culture like. So for Asians, like the desirable traits are like mysterious and like exotic and like oriental stuff like that. I think like in cases such as those, like those movies are like really dangerous for like stopping people from like hating their culture because like you get like the movie makes Chinese culture look like very goofy.
Yeah, I'm a very big movie watcher. I like to binge watch a lot of movies, but
Like Minions?
Minions vs. Gru, I count money, fine. However, I saw a movie. It was definitely American aspect. There were two guys, spy agents. I forgot what the movie was called, but there was one scene where they had to go into Chinatown in the middle of New York, and all I hear when they're walking through Chinatown is traditional Chinese music, the gongs. I hear a lot of Chinese noises. People like. I saw a scene where there's a restaurant and they're like cooking dogs on the side, which it's not how Chinese people should be represented. They don't always cook dogs. We don't always eat dogs. But I just saw that scene. I was wondering, like, this is not how Chinese culture should be represented, you know? So I didn't feel like hated. I didn't feel offended or anything. But
it's just weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just strange to see.
It's just
like,
strange. It was very strange. Yeah.
People like you who like came from the same place as you being like represented this way.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
It's just weird.
Well, I feel like playing devil's advocate. I think it's a very easy way to like show the audience that you're in like Chinatown per se, and like just having the super stereotypical like music, having this like a bunch of stereotypes is a really easy way to depict. Oh, they're in a Chinese area. Well, I do agree this is extremely harmful, but I do understand why they would go this route.
I mean, we're kind of arguing. I feel like the argument runs on like a different line of thinking than like what Ryan and I are saying. Like, you're saying like that they should keep it in for the purpose of like making the movie more accessible to people, whereas we're saying like it's inherently harmful to the image of Asians, and like that's kind of like two different points we're making. I mean, I guess even like. On the topic of like making the movie more accessible, like you can easily just like put a sign outside that says like Chinatown or like put a text at the bottom that says Chinatown. Like there's a million ways that you can like easily educate people that like, oh, they are in fact in Chinatown. The main, I guess I kind of want to like go into depth because I can see how like you can sort of view like just showing Chinatown and like super Chinese Chinatown at that, how like that can seem kind of like benign. The reason why that's harmful is because if you show a group of people like a highlight of a culture, they boil down that culture to those highlights, and they don't really like think that there's anything else to those highlights, and you end up creating this like false perception of that culture to a group that like knows literally nothing about it, and it ends up creating like a lot of misinformation, and also does open up like a lot of ridicule because, for instance, like. The funny old kung fu lady stereotype, or like the old master that like teaches kung fu. Like, I don't know. Ryan, did you want to?
Yeah, talking about from the misinformation that people could boil down. I'm talking from a personal experience myself. I was at a sleepaway camp, just chilling, and these two of my bunkmates came up to me. While we were talking, I mentioned something about Chinese food and what I do back here, and they mentioned, "Do you know kung fu?" or like, "Do Chinese people eat cats?" And I just feel it's very there's a lot of misinformation that probably they learned from different media and movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
And I guess expanding upon Sean's point, like, movies can be such a good educational platform for people like who aren't from a specific culture if done in the correct manner. So like if those stereotypical points are not the only thing being used, and they, if the person producing the movie is able to like connect with somebody or hire somebody on their team who like, if the movie is about Chinese culture, if they're able to like hire people who are Chinese to like become a part of the movie production and make it in a way that does like highlight amazing points of a culture, like that can be such an educational platform for everybody in the world to like see a culture, again, as we talked about at the beginning, like be celebrated. So I think that like mass media is such an interesting way of like you can do it so right, and it can be an amazing experience where lots of people can become educated and a culture can be like highlighted and even like put on a pedestal in society. But it can also be done like so poorly, as you guys both talked about, with like all the misinformation that can be spread. So
yeah, I think like a good way to like sort of identify when movies are like kind of pushing the line of like being very bad at like building up what a culture is like when, so for instance, like if they're showing like a Chinese person, if that Chinese person is like very exaggeratedly Chinese, like they wear the silk robes with the what are they called? Not the straw hats. They're like the little crowns, like the emperors had. I don't know what they're called. They have like incense in the corner or whatever. Like red posters everywhere, lanterns everywhere. When the person is exaggeratedly Chinese, like that's kind of harmful to the image of like Chinese culture, because like in movies, like people, the focus is generally like not the culture. That's kind of like a background note. But if you're like pushing it in people's faces, like people can't help but notice it, and like that's when it sort of becomes dangerous, and that's when we sort of like reach iffy territory. But I guess we can talk. We shouldn't really focus on media, should we? It's more like
I mean, I guess it's just like to draw it back to what we were talking about originally. There's such an interesting connection between like what we see in the media, what we see on social media, what we learn as a child, and like those I feel like are all contributors to like why somebody could have an identity crisis. So I think it's interesting that like we organically got to media as a point of conversation, because I think it is such a large influence upon like your identity itself and how you feel about your identity. Because just like social media, just like in the classroom, when you watch movies or you watch TV shows, like the people you see influence how you feel about yourself. So I think that's really interesting that came up in this discussion.
I'm actually curious. This is like completely unrelated to media, but like with the child you were talking about that you teach, who's special needs, but his parents don't really see him as such. Like, is he aware of like the situation?
He is very young, but the teachers in the classroom are aware of the situation and are trying to speak to like the parents, like through a doctor, basically, to have the doctor say, here's like a medical scan of your child's brain. And they think that like that's the only way that they're going to be able to like communicate with the parents and be like, here's the areas of the brain that are deficient in a way compared to like, I guess, a neurotypical child. And they are hoping that like by showing this like computer generated image of the child's brain, like it's going to be like a moment where the parents can realize that. But it's sad because the child like can't talk, because he does have autism and like uses a talking device, but it's hard to communicate with him and have him recognize that his parents are not supporting him in his education.
Like the parents don't even like recognize that.
The parents like recognize it obviously because it's something that's involved in their life, but they are not being supportive in the way that they need to be to help the child grow. So like for instance, they take away his talking device at home because they feel that he should be able to talk by himself, which is something that he like neurologically is unable to do.
Yeah.
So it just builds off that idea that like they were, have reinforced this, I guess, kind of notion that they want their child to succeed in the manner that they feel. And unfortunately, that's going to negatively impact the child even more than he is already struggling.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like that's kind of a common trend with like parents where like, specifically Asian parents, where like they kind of ignore like how complex children are. Like, I think it's just kind of simple, and like as a result, like you. So I can also say like personally, like a lot of my dislike for my culture came from like frustration with my parents. Either like for the Chinese school thing, like I'll like constantly try to convince them like don't let me go, and then they would say like no, you have to go, and I'd be like, well, I hate it now. Stuff like that, where I would like resent my parents, specifically for like cultural related things. I can definitely see like how parenting can play like such a large role in creating like an identity crisis. But, like, I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that. Ryan, you raise your hand.
Oh no, I was just gonna bring out a point in my personal life. To everyone who's listening out there, I want everyone to know that Asian parents are not always so non-supportive of their kids.
We rag on them in laws.
Yes. Chloe, the point you were talking about earlier about the discussion you skipped with autism, I have a brother who has autism myself. And by the way, I'm Asian, of course, that's why I'm here. But my parents are very supportive. They're not forcing my brother to be into a high level class. They're not taking away his talking device. he is slowly he's learning actually pretty quickly. But my parents aren't really pushing him to the point like, oh, you have to be a doctor, you have to be this, you have to be that. He's still trying to figure out what he's trying to do, but my parents are definitely very supportive of him right now.
That's amazing, and that's I think how you have to be. Like, it's so wonderful when parents are supportive of their children in the ways that they need to be. And I guess it's kind of like as we are growing up and as we're all getting older, like some of us are going to college, some of us are, you know, moving up in high school. Like, it's so interesting to start thinking about like how you were raised versus how like you want to raise your children. And it's interesting, like we're all having this conversation now. Like, how are we going to have this conversation in 10 or 20 years when like the circumstances are different?
I think going back to what Chloe said about the parents not really supporting the child, I think that's a very common stereotype, even though it's very true, of like tiger parents, especially tiger mom, and how they don't really care as much about how the child feels and more about what the child accomplishes. They're super hyper focused on what they do and on like every minute of the day, but they don't really take into account what the child is feeling at the moment. And I feel like that can really pressure a child into having this kind of identity crisis of like not feeling like you belong at home because you're constantly told to do either chores or homework or extracurriculars, and in school you obviously don't look like everyone. Look like everyone else, and you feel isolated. Yeah.
If I can bring up like one specific example of, I guess, like how sort of something, I don't know what the right word is, not really like too sensitive to what the child wants and, you know, what the child like needs, I guess, not really needs, I don't know. Just when I was like kind of telling my parents or, you know, even my Chinese school teachers, like, I don't really want to be here. You know, what is the point of me being here? I think it really all just boils back to you're going to regret this when you grow up. And when you're older, you're going to think that you would have spent better time in Chinese school and, you know, after you've, like everyone who's left said that they regretted their decision. And I think when you're telling your child to do something, or at least when I was told to do something, and the reason was because if I don't do it, I'm going to regret it later on. I think it creates a mindset where you're fearful of what you missed out on, and you know, these things that you really don't like, and maybe things that, you know, are not really beneficial to you at all. However, you just develop that mindset. What if I regret this? What if I regret that? And I think that can be pretty harmful.
I mean, in the end, a lot of Asian parents, they're just trying to do the best for their child. They're trying to they're trying to support them more academically than emotionally most of the time because they're more traditional. They're trying to set them up for success, and I think that's where a lot of these like tiger mom, tiger dad kind of stereotypes comes from.
Asian parents, although they're very pushy, they give their own kids this mindset that you have to worry about the future, that they forget to enjoy enjoy the present. So what Asian parents could do is they could allow their kid to do what they want as long as they're supportive of it. They should be worrying about their future and what they should be doing like a couple years later in life, but they also shouldn't push the kid in the present to what they shouldn't be doing or what they don't want to do. Like, for example, I play golf myself. I'm wearing golf clothes right now. I was playing in a tournament with another Asian boy. He was my age. He was 13 at the time. And his dad was caddying for him, so he was accompanying his kid, giving him tips, you know, telling him what club to hit. And in golf, you get frustrated when you play bad. You get frustrated. So like every sport. When this Asian boy, he was playing pretty bad, and his dad was actually yelling at him. It was not, and he was very, very pushful. You have to get better. You have to and he was talking about you need to get golf to go into Stanford. And the kid was like arguing with the dad, was saying, I don't want to do golf. I want to do like some art. I forgot what they were saying. I want to do art. I don't want to do golf. And the dad was like, you have to do golf. You have to do it for your future. So Asian parents do like push, always worry about the future, but they don't like worry. They don't think about what the kid wants to do right now in the present. So
I guess like about that, it's literally just a disconnect of like them not like living here, not knowing what you're going through. Like they are trying to do the best here, I guess, in a broader sense, because that's what worked for them. For most of our parents, they moved from China or Asian countries, and that's also what worked for them: hard work and focusing on the future, focusing like trying to have faith that the future will be better, and putting their head down, and like no matter what struggle they go through, enduring it to get that future. And I guess that's kind of what they're trying to ingrain in us, which is that that if you just sit at your desk and do more studying, then you get to a good college, get a good job, and have a happy life. Which is personally, I think that's not exactly the case with the in the U.S. because I guess like to compare, in China there is one big test, the Gaokao, and if you do well in this, you get to go to university and then you get a good job. But if you don't do well, you have to like maybe retake it next year, or like go to a bottom tier university and then have the whole cycle go again. But that's not the case with the U.S. It's not just based on what grades you get in school. It's what your actual interests are. It's like what you do not only in school but outside of school for your extracurriculars or your sports and like stuff like that. And I guess that's a main point that parents don't see, or Asian parents don't see, because they haven't grown up in this culture. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest differences, correct me if I'm wrong, between like Asian parents and I'd say more other countries, like let's just say white again, is that
White is not a country.
That is not a country. White is not okay. You know what I'm talking about, but like the different like positions the parents have over the child. Like in a lot of Asian families, what the parent says is what happens. There's like no debate, no conversation at all. It's more just like the parent telling the child what to do. There's no what the child feels, what the child thinks. It doesn't matter. It's just what the parent thinks that is best for the child, and that is what happens. I feel like it might be different. I think it's a little bit more different in other cultures where there's actual dialogue between parents and children, and where they're on the same playing field. They can have a dialogue, and they actually understand each other's viewpoints, and then they get to a common ground, which is a lot more common than I think a lot of Asian American families.
Fully don't confirm or deny that.
No, I mean, I think that, like, I mean, in my house, it's definitely, like, my mom is very strict and, like, kind of has her ideas about what I need to do in life. But I think, like, for a lot of my friends, especially, like, seeing the dialogue play out that you're talking about, like, this is what I want to do, this is what I want for my future. Like, it's so interesting to see just, like, coming from, like, a household that is a little bit more strict, but also just, like, I don't know, just, like, seeing, like, the fluidity between, like, a child and their parents, and a child being able to say, like, actually, I don't want to do this. Like, I'd rather try something else, or that doesn't make me happy. I'm going to do something different. Like, I guess having that freedom that I see a lot of my friends having in their household is something that I've always been, like, a little bit, I don't know, I just think it's, like, a really good way to parent, in a sense that it's, like, giving your child the opportunity to advocate for themselves.
Well, in your household, is there, like, a platform for discussion?
Somewhat. My mom raised us with, like, very, like, conservative Jewish values, which are, like, somewhat similar in the sense of, like, the parent sets the standard and you have to, like, rise to set standard, both, like, in Jewish learning and in, like, academically. But I think that a lot of times, like, as I've gotten older and I've become, like, more of a adult, like, my mom is more open to having those discussions with me, which I don't know if, like, you guys have found that as you've gotten older, like, you've had more of a chance to advocate for yourself, or it's somewhat similar of, like, this is the strict rules.
I know, like, when I was, like, younger, it was, like, way, way harder to negotiate, and then, like, after, like, probably, like, dozens of shouting matches with my parents, like, I just, like, whittled them down, and, like, eventually, like, we got to a point where, like, we are at least able to, like, talk with them and, like, discuss things with them. Before, it was just, like, you do this. No. Well, I said so. Oh, well. But now it's, like, you do this, and it's like, no, and then it's like, why do you not want to do this? Or like, why do you want me to do this? Stuff like that. You're at least able, at least now I'm able to have like some sort of dialogue. Also to talk about a point brought up earlier, I forgot who brought it up, but it was like parents nowadays don't really like realize how different things are from like when they were sort of like getting their start in America. We sort of discussed this on the Model Minority episode 2. Go check that one out if you haven't watched it, by the way. So in that episode, we sort of discussed how like as specifically immigrant parents coming to America, Asian parents no less coming to America, Asian immigrants, there's like a huge risk in your mind because like any failure really sets you back like a lot. If you fail a test or if you like fail a job interview or something, like you have now failed as an Asian in America, and that's like terrible. That's how things were a couple decades ago. And as like I can definitely understand how like as a parent you are really terrified that the conditions are like the same nowadays, where the standard for success is set so high for Asian Americans that they aren't allowed like any room for failure or any room for creativity. Like they have to stick to one path, one safe path, and they have to succeed in that path. Otherwise, their child is like I don't know, like deserves to be yelled at, like useless, whatever. However, parents normally feel when they don't like their child. But I think it's like a really important point that we need to cover now is like, especially if you haven't watched the Model Minority podcast, and I like repeating this, is that like things are different now. You don't need to rely on this like one set path because like there are so many more opportunities now in America than there were a couple days ago. Granted, things are still incredibly bad. However, they're not as bad as they were when you would like mess up once as an immigrant and there it is, like your life's over.
Right, and I guess to like circle back to what we talked about at the beginning, from like a psychological standpoint, like with parents, with school systems, with the media, with everything we've talked about today, like everything that is implanted on a child at a young age shapes their identity. And if a child is taught at a young age that like they are, you know, special for who they are and their culture is celebrated and their self is celebrated for who it is, it allows them to feel like they can be proud of their identity, and it puts a limitation on these identity crises. But kind of to speak to what Sean just mentioned, like if a child is put in a household or kind of like surrounded by media or surrounded in a school system where they don't feel supported and they feel like otherized and they feel like they're different, and because they're different, that's not okay. Like that's only going to contribute to more identity crises and more issues within a child's life that is going to affect them like traumatically for the long run. So it's so important to have that like nurturing relationship, I feel like, in all realms of life, being like as a child or like through media, because that is what shapes a child's identity. And a child is a blank slate. So from a young age, like that identity is so important to foster.
So I don't really like talking about like parenting too much on this podcast because like I know how difficult it is, not from personal experience. Like I can see how difficult it can be, and like we're just kids. Like if you're a parent and you're listening to this, like you're gonna take our word with a grain of salt because you know we don't know what it's like being in your shoes. But if you're a really bad way to deal with like your child developing an identity crisis and like hating his own culture is like say they come home and like they don't like their culture. A really bad way is like try and force it on them because like they're just gonna hate it more. One of like I guess we can talk about like a little bit is like one of like the biggest sort of like phenomena in trying to like influence people is the idea of like the boomerang effect, where if you're too dominant with messages or if like you're too controlling, in like almost all cases, you might lead to like some short-term behavior change. Like maybe they listen to you in like the very, very short term in like that moment, but in the long run, their behaviors are going to differ from what you intended because you were too dominant with them. So if you try to like force a culture that like a child doesn't even want onto them, they're just going to hate it and reject it even more down the road when you no longer have control over them. And like this spirals completely out of hand, especially when they're like 18 and they end up like leaving your like sphere of influence because you're unable to like sort of like halt this like the growth of like their hatred towards their culture because like they've been fostering it for so long. So like I'd say like if you're gonna take one tip, just like take it that like you shouldn't force things onto your kid in general because they're gonna hate it.
And like from that psychological concept, it's so important to allow your child to like establish their own identity. And sometimes, like what Max was talking about before, like allowing your child to make decisions for themselves, even if it is counter to like what you believe is best. Just this idea that like children are young and they, you know, do make stupid decisions, but sometimes it's nice to like let them become a part of the plan for their future.
Yeah, I definitely feel like finding the middle ground is the most important, because children by themselves, without any guidance, can make some very stupid decisions, or with too much guidance can rebel, like extremely rebel and start hating their culture, their parents, their everything. But finding that middle ground is where you can guide your children, your child in a way that helps, but also don't over guide and control them. Is I think a very important point.
I mean, I guess kind of to wrap up, we can sort of discuss the way that, like, if you hear or you're talking to one of your friends and you hear that they're having these issues with their identity and they feel like, you know, they want to be separated from this, you know, like where they are, from what they're feeling at home, what they're feeling is kind of being pushed on them by their parents or by the media or by society, like, what are ways that you guys can talk to your friends and I guess kind of like show them that you're there for them in these really difficult moments? Because we did talk about the idea that like the worst place that a child could end up when they're going through these identity crises is like in a place of isolation where they feel alone. So kind of how can you support your friends around you when they're going through these hard times?
I'm gonna like go out on a limb here sort of and say like there's nothing you can do individually to help them. Like after all, for instance, if they've been like through the school system and they've been put up with like all of this like Asian stereotypes, like funny Asian jokes, haha doodles, whatever, like all their all their adolescent years, you as like one person are like very, very incapable of doing anything, because you can't just like overturn that as one person. The best that you can do, I feel, is like probably introduce them to like some community. Hopefully they take to it. If they don't, like you kind of just have to let them like get over it themselves, because the worst thing that you can do when trying to like treat the sort of like subtle development of an identity crisis is to like force a solution onto the other person. Because if you do, you're just gonna like expedite the process more. They're just gonna like hate themselves even more, hate their culture even more. Oh, also I want to say like the development of an identity crisis is like super, super subtle. You are probably if you like think that someone is like going through it or like someone has developed one, like you're probably wrong, because the signs are like really difficult to see. It's the gradual erosion of like your confidence in yourself, and it's so gradual that like I didn't even notice it like happened until like, so my process like sort of finished in like I'd say like 7th grade ish, and like I only realized that this happened like this year. So it's been like 5 years, and I look back on it and I'm like, wait, like that actually kind of happened, and that was like a thing in my life. So don't blame yourself for not noticing, and don't like jump the gun either.
And I guess to Sean's point, like about how hard it is to like recognize identity crises, one of the best ways, obviously, that you can be supportive is like to listen to your friends if they do choose to share this with you. And I think one of our later podcast episodes, we're going to be talking about like the importance of mental health and like the stigmatization of mental health, like in different communities. But the idea that like it's okay to share with your friends and like the people around you that you are going through these moments, and more than it's okay, it should be encouraged that if you are going through these moments, like as hard as it is to recognize like introspectively within yourself, if you do start to realize, like as Sean stated, like he started to realize this year that like this was something that he went through as a child, it's important that that's something that you discuss in a setting with your friends, with people around you, even with like adults that you can trust. Like I just think it's so important that you are having these like really difficult discussions, because it's something that shapes you and who you are. So it's important that that doesn't become something that's like traumatizing to you in the future.
I guess the question to bring to the whole group, like, for these stereotypes, for having an identity crisis, do you think embracing it and like when you're like talking to your friends that are not Asian, do you think embracing these stereotypes, do you think that would be beneficial compared to something of just if like like not talking about it, something like that.
What do you mean embracing stereotypes?
As like making a joke here and there with your friends, showing that you're comfortable with your identity. Do you think that's a thing that's beneficial?
I think there's like a balance, and like God knows I don't know that balance. There's like a fine balance between like making enough stereotype jokes in that like once you are comfortable with who you are, you can make jokes, and then on the other end of that scale, there's like not being comfortable and making jokes to fit in, and like you have to sort of find the balance such that like you are both comfortable as in who you are as a person, and also like the jokes you make don't affect you. I guess this is kind of just like a word jumble. I don't know if you got that. If you got that, God bless. But like, it's kind of hard to say because on one hand, like stereotypes are dangerous because they set up the like bad perceptions that like people later turn into like just full blown racism later on in their lives. But at the same time, like they're just like sort of like this funny thing that like friends do with each other, and that's how like you. Like that's how people can tell you're like able to take a joke. After all, like everyone does it to each other. Like I know Italian stereotypes, I know like German stereotypes, I know like American stereotypes even. So I think to some extent, like everything in moderation.
Yeah. So going back to what Chloe said, coping with this feeling of self-identity crisis or having an identity crisis. I think one of the most important things to note about this issue is that this sources from a feeling of not belonging with any group, really. And I feel like a very important, or like a way to combat this is to find someone that looks like you. Because a majority of the time, especially when you're younger, you don't realize that other people are going through the same things as you, especially if they are from the similar background of an immigrant. I feel like if you do feel alone, finding someone that looks like you, or you think might be going through this same thing, can actually help a lot.
It sounds like weird to say, but like genuinely just like find someone that looks like you. Like that sounds really weird, but it works.
I think sometimes, like, for me, it's so, like, reassuring to hear somebody else, like, out in public, like, speaking Hebrew, because I'm like, oh, that's, like, somebody else that, like, I can understand them, and they can understand me, and, like, we might not have a conversation, because, like, we're just in this random grocery store, but, like, it's nice to know that there's other people out there who have similar differences than what you have. So it's sometimes, like, really comforting to find those moments where you find other people that are similar to you and have similar things that, like, make you different. How do you guys think kind of like this should all be addressed?
Just like wrap it up.
Oh, okay.
So sorry, just ask the question.
Who wants to wrap it up?
No, just ask the question.
Oh, I was gonna say a really good way I think that we could like wrap up tonight's episode is just the idea of if you were to give like one piece of advice to I guess somebody who you feel like maybe in Sean's case the person who bullied you as a child and kind of like made you feel different, like if you were to say to them now like this is what made me upset and this is what I think you could have done better, what would that be?
Don't be racist, bro. I thought I was in the majority, but it turns out I guess I'm in the minority where like my situation has sort of like only happened because I didn't have like other Asian friends around me, or not a lot of other Asian friends, specifically East Asian friends. I think like it is important to note that it's people who look like you, not just like people who are from like generally the same region that your parents are from. But yeah, for my specific case, like I don't know, if you're going through what I'm going, just go to Chinese school, go on a couple of China trips with your friends. You'll get over it, trust me.
So like you found the importance of community and like finding those connections.
Let's say that, yeah, that sounds way more motivational than what I said. Any other words of advice? Guys, if you don't, the podcast ends and we all die.
Yeah, so I think as someone who never really experienced identity crisis, I think an important thing you can do is when you do feel alone, just try to find a sense of community, whether it be someone who also is sitting by themselves, if you're a younger audience, or just like finding someone online, finding like a community online.
Don't trust strangers though.
One more thing I would say, and especially as Henry noted, if we do have any younger listeners, if you are going through this, or older listeners too, I mean, and if you are going through this feeling of an identity crisis, it's so important for you to know that you're not alone, you're not going through this by yourself, and even if you do feel like you're kind of in your own corner and you are feeling isolated and you feel like nobody else in the world really gets how you feel and that you feel, so different, that's despite the fact that your feelings are so valid, it's not the case that you're the only one going through this. So
unfortunately, you will grow up and realize that you are the very opposite of unique.
Yeah. No, but on a serious note, like it's easy to find people if you, what you guys talked about, find somebody who looks like you, find somebody who talks like you, like find people around you that are similar. That is one way to really cope with these like identity issues, because it's really reassuring to hear that other people are in the same boat that you're in.
I think that was a really good ender. Thank you for listening to this
do a cold
an
outro.
hour and 20-minute podcast.
Hey, we should do a cold outro.
What's it called after?
It's like a...
Catch you next time!
You want to sing a song?
No.
Fast.